Welcome to the introduction to the rainwater treatment train, which is a smaller version of the larger training we'll have within this essential rainwater harvesting course. And by way of introduction, we're going to use the Australian example, which has over nearly 2.5 million households that rely on rainwater harvesting for drinking water supplies. And in that country, over 6 million people actually use rainwater supplies for some sort of use. And although there's such widespread use of rainwater, there's no evidence of widespread health impacts or epidemics in Australia, and there never has been. This raises a question about why not, given all of the discussions about how rainwater might be harmful.
And Peter, you're referencing rainwater without end-of-line treatment, specific end-of-line sterilization or chlorination, correct?
That's right. A key confusion in the rainwater industry is people from the utility water sector or that mindset who rely on end-of-line treatment plants as their sole treatment process, tend to apply that thinking to rainwater supplies that has a treatment train. So in these so many Australian households that actually drink rainwater, and they have done for over 100 years, there is no so-called end-of-line treatment in any of these houses. So mainstream water industry commentators tend to say the rainwater is untreated, but as we'll demonstrate in this introduction and in the course, that's not the case, because it's the natural treatment train that's improving the water supply.
Right, and I wanted to jump in and bring that up because personally that was an area of confusion even for me when I was first getting into this.
And it's a worldwide area of confusion. The Australian example is a good one to put forward here, because there's nothing like real evidence to show what's really going on. So it's a lot of speculation about water quality, but when you've got 100 plus years of a lot of people using so-called untreated rainwater without any health effects, then it starts to introduce some realities. So this is what we're going to discuss in this course. And as we know, rainwater used for non-drinking uses in urban areas, our cities, can dramatically improve the security of regional water supplies, and this is a global problem at the moment and will be ongoing global problem as we have climate change and increased population. So this discussion about rainwater supplies is of international significance. Now, there has been, as we've just discussed, speculation about the quality or potential of rainwater supplies since the 1880s. We should be mindful that we've been using rainwater as a sole source of water since ancient Egyptians and Anzac times. It's the first ever water supply, so we need to be aware there's a historical context beyond when we were creating our centralised water supplies from the 1880s onwards. So this presentation provides an overview of the rainwater treatment train. We will get into the detail later on in our course modules. Recent health surveys is probably a good way to give a context. So there's lots of claims about, rainwater makes you sick and so on. So Professor Jane Hayworth from University of Western Australia did the first ever very large health survey, and she tested whether or not rainwater was harmful as compared to utility mains water by checking whether children in the age of 4 to 6 year old had increased presence of gastrointestinal symptoms, diarrhea. So, and they call it highly credible gastrointestinal symptoms in the medical industry. And what she found that these children in South Australia were less likely to get diarrhea than children drinking mains water. So this mains water, she compared it to, was chlorinated and filtered public's mains water. This first study by Professor Hayworth created quite a controversy, particularly from the water utilities. So she did it again and found a very similar result with, I think, 6,000 children. So there's a lot of orthodoxy that is challenged by trying to understand the rainwater treatment drain. There's been 12 other very significant international epidemiological studies, as they're called, health surveys throughout the world. And the most recent, they've found similar results. The most recent one was by Rodrigo and others from the Monash University Medical Centre, and they tested the difference between people using treated and untreated rainwater, noting our description earlier on as they perceive that a rainwater treatment drain is untreated, and it's perceived that an end-of-line treatment is treated. So it's a very mainstream water industry process. They also found there is no difference in the health outcomes from people with treated and untreated rainwater. Now, my PhD was began at a place called Fig Tree Place, and it was a pioneering water-sensitive urban design, or as in the US they call it low-impact development site. And what you can see in the picture in front of you is what I don't recommend as a rainwater storage. Back in those days, the urban folk, as opposed to the rural folk, didn't have a great understanding of rainwater harvesting, and especially the engineers and the water professionals. So they put in a very poor quality underground stormwater detention tank, they call them. As you can see there, it was in a garden bed. There are holes in the walls of the tank, and there are holes in the roof of it. So whenever it rains, soil and leaves enter this damaged stormwater tank. So a great test case, really. So in spite of that really poor result in this 27 unit property development, these outcomes were found. So we actually found from the roof, as you can see, and this was a former bus station. It was next to a bus station. It's in a dense urban area, which is also adjacent to an industrial area. So we expect to see some contaminants on those roofs, and we do, as you can see here. There's fecal and total coliforms, heterotrophic plate counts, which is a good indicator because it's all carbon fixing bacteria, pseudomonas species, which you find in soil and other places. But we've also got ammonia, nitrates, lead and zinc, and we measured probably 40 or 50 other parameters, but these are key indicators. Then we look at the tank water surface. So it's the very top layer of water stored in the rainwater storage, and you can see that, as you would expect if you think about it, there's an increase in the bacteria, but there's decreases in the chemical and other physical parameters. So what's happening here is leaves and soil falling into the tank during rain is increasing the presence of bacteria in the tank, because as you'll find out later on, not all these bacteria, well, hardly any of it comes from fecal contamination. It just comes from soil sources, and it's not all harmful. So when we get to the point of supply in the tank, which is down near the bottom, you can actually see dramatic improvement in all of the parameters compared to what came from the roof. And then from the hot water service that was set at between 50 and 60 degrees, they were storage hot water services, you can see a further dramatic improvement. So obviously this is a treatment train. The water quality is changing throughout this system. So why? So we actually tested this in another site. Note the rusty galvanized iron roof. So if you're into water quality, you would realize a rusty roof will give you zinc. a large rainwater storage. It's the side of that house, which is actually 9,000 litres. I don't know what that is in gallons, but we can work that out later. But behind you can see the industrial shed. So it's an urban area, old house, old roof, but a above ground storage in an industrial area. It's a place called Maryville. As we can see here, we've got various contaminants coming from the roof. Here we don't have a poor quality storage, we've got a good quality storage, and we can see at the point of supply and the rainwater system a fairly dramatic improvement in most of the parameters. You can see a substantial amount of zinc because of a rusty roof. The hot water supply is far greater quality, and on the last column it's compared to the Australian guidelines, and as you can see the rainwater is consistent with those guidelines across the majority of the parameters except for zinc. But zinc is not a health parameter, it's an aesthetic parameter. This is my own house 20 years ago. It's a pretty famous house in Australia for researching rainwater harvesting and winning policy arguments with government. So this is in a place called Carrington. It's an inner city area that's also the dockland, so it's industrial. You see down the side of the house there's rainwater storages, there's lots of trees. There's my golden retriever entering the house, by the way, queen of the house. Here we actually tested this concept that there's a treatment train, but there's also stratification of water quality. So we can see here, we're looking at fecal coliforms, total coliforms, Pseudomonas species, and heterotrophic plate counts are the key indicators. The water surface in the tanks had a very different quality to mid-depth in the rainwater storage, and a very different quality to down at the bottom of the storage. But the real quality of rainwater is assessed of what comes out of your taps. People are testing what's in your rainwater storage. You're misleading yourself. It's the same as going to test in the water authority's reservoir. You'll get poor water quality all the time. So we'll talk about this in the course. If you were testing rainwater and you want to understand whether or not it's good quality, you need to check at the tap, not within the storage. So you can see here within the tap, the cold and the hot tap, with dramatically improved quality. So we've got a natural rainwater train evident there also. We used DNA analysis using poly chain reactions, and that revealed that majority of the coliform bacteria we found there was actually Bacillus species, which is a ubiquitous soil bacteria that is relatively harmless. So water tests we use in utility mains water supplies aren't very good in environmental waters because they use environmental bacteria as surrogates to indicate there might be something harmful there. They don't directly measure anything harmful. So we'll talk about that further in the course as well. And all the metal and chemical parameters were in the guidelines at this site. So what's going on? Well, there's a treatment train, and we discovered this over 20 years ago. But there's an entire process. So here's a chart from a PhD who worked with me named Anthony Spinks a long time ago. There's what's known as roof inoculation, so debris, leaves, sediments, bacteria, all sorts of things can land on your roof. Some of it blows off, some of it's destroyed by heat, rainfall, UV light from the sun, all sorts of processes. Some of those things survive on the roof. So there's a loss of contaminants. So roofs don't just collect contaminants, they also lose contaminants. And that loss of contaminants as part of the treatment train is often not discussed in the more traditional literature. Then some of those contaminants enter the storage, but to get from the roof to your storage, it's got to pass through your gutter and your downpipes and hopefully a leaf diverter and other things you might put in to stop contaminants entering your storage. And this is going to be discussed in the anatomy of the rainwater tank in this course. So the process of getting from the roof to your storage involves also losses of contaminants and organisms and debris. Then within your storage, you've got these processes going on we've just discussed. Your tank is actually a bioreactor. Biofilm settlement and a range of other processes are acting in there, which actually removes contaminants. Then, if you're supplying your house or elsewhere via pump, bacteria doesn't like pressure. So passing water with bacteria in it through a small pump actually results in loss of organisms as well. And domestic hot water systems actually result in very dramatic loss of bacteria from rainwater as well. We'll talk about that too. And then if you've got contaminants in a rainwater harvesting system, one count of anything can't make anyone sick. First of all, there needs to be a pathway for any human illness or inconvenience, and it's got to be by ingestion or inhalation. So ingestion is obviously drinking it, inhaling it is breathing it in, and in that pathway to humans, because humans in their throat, mouth and stomach have very, very strong defense mechanisms also. So there's this concept of infectious dose. If there's anything in the water, and if you're drinking it versus contact, so is it above this infectious dose or below it? And then right at the bottom, is there a chance of a mild or severe illness or no chance of illness at all? So that's the entire treatment train from rainfall to humans. It's not as simple as people make it out to be.